Okay, it's 8:15. I'd like to call this meeting to order. First item on the agenda is the invocation. If you'll bow with me, we'll pray. Gracious Heavenly Father, we want to thank you for your blessings. Thank you especially for the rain that you've given us in the hill country. We love the rain here, and we want to thank you so much for that. Pray that you will give us guidance and give us wisdom today as we conduct the meeting, the items that are before us today. In Jesus' name we do pray. Amen. Are there any visitors? Josh, you want to? I see none. The second item is the approval of the minutes. I assume everyone had a chance to go over the minutes that were sent to you earlier.
I move approval.
Move approval
Second.
by Rose, second by Linda. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Those opposed, say no. There are none. Okay. Number 3, the Parkland Dedication Ordinance. Let's start from 3A. Is that you, or is that Malcolm?
Well, good to see everybody. This first item is a topic that has been talked about in the city since about 2010. The city adopted a park dedication ordinance back in the early 90s. I'm going to go through some of the history. But there are some things that are associated with that ordinance that need to be addressed. And we needed to work through a few issues that would allow for the city to do approvals associated with parks in sequence. And one of the major items has been the approval of the comprehensive plan by the city council, which identified this particular need. So let me run through real quickly. This is the first of many presentations to the Parks Board, and also there'll be presentations to the Zoning and Planning Commission, obviously among staff. We'll have to deal with some public input processes, and then also City Council approval at the end of the day. But let me give you the overview of what we're going to talk about today. Definition and purpose, what is park dedication, what our current ordinance in Kerrville looks like, what some of the needs are associated with that particular ordinance, what we discussed back in 2010 and 11 in regard to those changes, and then what are our next steps that we need to take to update the ordinance. The first thing I want to talk about, I feel like Donald Trump here. I'm looking from one side to the other. I'm looking at these screens. The definition purpose on what park dedication is, it's a development tool to enhance neighborhood and community park distribution and improvements. Its purpose is solely for neighborhood and community parks. Generally, those are adopted by city ordinance. Developers dedicate land or park for parkland, or they pay a fee in lieu of land to be used by the government entity to acquire and develop parks. These first ordinances occurred back in the early 1900s. The state of Montana actually kind of kicked off these first ordinances, and in Texas back in the 30s, Corpus Christi was the first Texas city to adopt park dedication. Most home rule cities like Kerrville have a park dedication requirement. It's not unique, it's not uncommon, but they're substantially different from city to city. They usually occur at the time of subdivision platting, and by law they can only be used for residential development. That changed back in the 80s. You could get parkland dedication for all development. It can include land for parks or fee in lieu of land, or a combination, and that last part is something that most ordinances in Texas allow for, a combination of land fees.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So
So the fee in lieu of land, does that mean that they are paying to develop that land and not put parkland in it?
That means they're paying the government per, in Kerrville's case, it's per unit, per residential unit. So if you have an apartment complex of 200 units, you pay an amount per unit, whatever that amount is times 200. If it's subdivision of a single family, then you pay an X dollar amount per lot being developed. And you pay that to the government with the idea that that government then uses that money to either buy land or to improve property. Usually the latter is the case, and that's the one that occurs mostly in Kerrville. But we'll get into some of that detail, but that's a good question, because the fee in lieu of issue is a key component to any modern park dedication ordinances. The big issue that faces Kerrville right now and has been a factor for cities all over is the courts. Developers aren't shy of suing. And when they find an issue that they seem to be is unfair or burdensome for them, then they often use the courthouse as a solution. But courts in Texas have additionally ruled that land and fees have to be roughly proportional to the remainder of the park system. So we couldn't come in here and say, hey, we're going to do something substantially larger and bigger than what we currently have in Kerrville. It's not that you can't improve it or you can't do more, you just can't make it unfair to development. And also that the park needs to serve the subdivision affected by the ordinance. It can't be used for fees to upgrade a park substantially detached. You can't take improvements from one side of town. You got to remember, most of these ordinances are in big cities. So if you take San Antonio, for example, you can't take subdivision park dedication from the north side and apply it to the south side that's 45 minutes away. You have to do it so that it is serving the citizens where the park dedication occurred. It also can't be used for other infrastructure. There were cases, I think Missouri City years ago, they were used in park dedication to do sewer projects somewhere in town, and that didn't last long. And it can't be used for maintenance or administrative costs. It can't be used for planning. It can't be used for things that are detached from developing a park or acquiring parkland. Park dedication is a tool to secure parks for a community. It is viewed as both a quality of life benefit and as an economic development benefit by making the community attractive to new residents and visitors and enhancing property values. That's a key component to the legality of park dedication. The park dedication is not intended to be the sole funding source for a community's parkland or park development needs. The idea is park dedication is to serve basically smaller neighborhood parks as opposed to larger regional parks. Kerrville's ordinance was originally adopted in '87 and it was amended in '91. The reason for those amendments, back in the '80s, park dedication was a hotbed for developer lawsuits, and so cities were going around after a court case or after a Texas Supreme Court case. Cities would then go and amend their ordinances so that they could be defendable in court. Kerrville's ordinance is also with an emphasis on fees in lieu of land rather than parkland, which is not a bad situation in Kerrville because we do have quite a bit of parkland for a town this size. Fees are paid per dwelling unit, not per lot, and that's a key component. That's a good thing. The amount per unit inside the city ranges from $125 to $225 per unit, depending upon the size of the unit. So if you have a smaller home, then you pay a certain amount. If you have a larger home, then you pay a different amount. When you're in the ETJ, just outside the city limit, you pay a flat $200. That line right there is a key issue that needs to be addressed, and we'll get into that in just a little bit. parkland and open space option in Kerrville is 1 acre per 42 dwelling units. What that does is it probably puts a burden more on fee in lieu of than on land, just because of the preference of the city probably not to get land and the preference of the developers to not to give it up. So I think fee in lieu of becomes really the only option. And while I was with the city, that's really all we dealt with was fee in lieu of. The city has to be, like I mentioned earlier in some court cases, you have to have a geographic relationship between where the money is spent and the people that are going to live in the area where the park dedication occurred. Kerrville is broken out into 2 geographic benefit districts divided by Highway 16. So you've got an east and a west, and that's perfectly fine. That works pretty well. And if a developer does come forward and says he wants to dedicate land, the city has the right to reject that donation. If somebody wants to develop a subdivision, they say, hey, you see that area down there that's got all the frogs and the mosquitoes? I want to give that to you as a park. The city has the right to reject that. Or if it's on a rocky incline and you can't really use it, the city can reject that as well.
Now,
Yes, ma'am.
Is there a time limit on when this money has to be used for park in that area?
There generally is. Most cities have a 10-year max on expending the money. What you don't want to do is collect the money, which has happened in a lot of cases. You collect the money and you just build up a war chest, putting it in an interest earning account and let it just sit there. Most ordinances require a 10-year expenditure on that particular fee in lieu of check that's turned in. So you have to keep a historical update on when that money was received and when it's spent. Good question. In '94, the city had some legal review done of the city ordinance, and they came forward with some reconsiderations on that ordinance, which have not been implemented. One was the unit size variable, which defines that, if you recall, the $125 up to $225 is based on size of unit. So if you're less than 1,000 feet, or if you're 20,000, 1,500, and so on and so on, you pay a higher rate. The idea is the bigger the house, the more people that are in it. That's not necessarily true, but that's how that exists, and they recommended at the time for there to be a review of that. Second is the ETJ, especially in Kerrville, is important. You know, we have about 25,000 people or so live inside the city limit, but Kerrville has a substantial population just outside the city limit. I think we've got about a 40,000 person municipal area that's just outside, and that larger population is in the extraterritorial jurisdiction of the city of Kerrville, and that is eventually going to be part of the city limit. So one of the arguments in the legal review was, why do you have a differentiation between inside the city or not? You have to approve plats within the ETJ anyway, so let's go ahead and make it the same. There's no reason not to have that the same. They recommended a needs-based or capital improvement methodology for fees, which was to take the wording in the ordinance and be a little clearer on what that was going to be used for, to avoid any future concern about that being used for administrative or non-capital improvement needs. And to also look at standards, and that's tied to a park and recreation master plan, which also needs to be updated, but that needs to define exactly how that money is going to be spent. What kind of standards do you want per park? The good thing about Kerrville's parks is they're pretty uniformly developed, so that's not a big concern here. The previous legal review and the ordinance itself were mentioned in the Parks Master Plans that have occurred since '94. It's always been one of these, hey, we need to do it, but there's always been something to slow that or stop that. The discussion that occurred at the Parks Board back in 2010 and 11 was to get this ordinance revised. There were some things that happened back then that stopped that. There were economic issues. Park dedication is directly tied to the positive feeling of the development community. Because if you get the development community adamantly opposed to these types of things, it's very hard to get that through the political process. So you have to find an economic time frame that works. You have to have the support systems like the Park Master Plan and the city's comprehensive plan kind of trigger the action, and that included this 2050 comp plan discussion over the last couple of years. And when that was adopted, there are two statements in that comprehensive plan dealing with park dedication. One is, evaluate the park dedication ordinance requiring future residential subdivisions to set aside adequate green space. It really didn't go into it any further. They just knew that there needed to be a revisit to this particular ordinance. The other is to assess the need for public amenities in existing neighborhoods and infill areas. Park dedication is a key component to infill in a community, especially if you get replatting in areas that occur in some of the older areas where you can infill with libraries and parks. You can also use park dedication fees in lieu in some of these infill areas as long as it's geographically fair. So that's a good tool. The next steps really are to begin the conversation. That's really all this is today, is just to talk about what park dedication is, what Kerrville has, and what we really need to do. Since you meet quarterly, we'll probably want to set up some kind of discussion, probably at each meeting or at least every other meeting, to go through what needs to happen in regard to park dedication. Like I said, we'll be working with the planning department, the Planning and Zoning Commission, public input, developer input, and then Parks Board input before we go to the City Council. But I see this taking several months to get through this. I have dealt with redos and new ordinances in other cities, and they take a while to get through that process. The last thing I think we'll need to do is have staff determine whether or not there needs to be any outside legal assistance. The city attorney will weigh in on that. If we look at the current ordinance and we only recommend some wording adjustments or some features that needed to be added or subtracted, that's one thing. If we're talking about going in and saying, time out, we're going to rewrite this from the get-go, then the city attorney's probably going to want there to be some outside legal assistance on that. So we'll have to wait to see what the city attorney has to say about that. At this point, the idea is to tweak the existing ordinance, but we'll cross that bridge as we get a little deeper into this process. So with that, I know this is, it's not as fun. Park dedication isn't as fun as talking about 5Ks and other things, but park dedication is a key part of the Parks Department. It's a key part of what the Planning Department does, because everything that comes into the city that even smells of residential development has to have a park dedication component to it. And that's what makes good cities, and that's what we want to do. So if you have any questions, yes, ma'am?
So is the money collected, is that set up into any kind of reserve account and dedicated to maintenance and cost issues for the parks that are in that residential? So the fee in lieu of
Yes.
that money?
It goes into a special account in the finance department, and it's tagged, each input amount is tagged on date, where it's from. There's a file that's kept on that. The account is got some interest earning capabilities. because it's a dedicated account. It doesn't go in the general fund or some other fund. And then it cannot be commingled with the operating budget in regard to maintenance or any kind of operational issue.
So it couldn't be used for if, say, the playscape needed
Yes,
maintenance.
it can be used for
that.
renovation. Yes, it can. It can't be used for maintaining the playground, but it can be used for replacing or major repair to it, making it ADA accessible, as an example. And we did a lot of that in the last 10 years or so.
Malcolm, could you give, as a specific example, the proposed development that's gonna be on Spur 98?
Yes.
What provisions are being considered in that for, parks or use by those people living there?
Well, I think what's being proposed there is a well-rounded, almost a mixed use, but at least a very well-rounded residential development with the idea that they understand the value of parks. Developers that get it generally know schools, parks, those are important things in your the subdivision development. And as they go through their planning and platting process, then those will be more defined, be a lot clearer to grasp exactly what happens. One of the things that the city generally would do is if someone was developing a subdivision and they wanted to build a park, the city, not in Kerrville's ordinance, but generally what you're going to want in most ordinances, let them do it and then give them a credit, because they can build that stuff a lot cheaper than you can. So you can get 50 cents on the dollar, for the cost of development if you let the developer build it when they're putting in the subdivision. And then they get the benefit of selling lots and houses with the park sitting there. That's a huge benefit. The city doing it and waiting 10 years to put a park in isn't necessarily the model that you want to follow. So I would think that development, being a kind of a many-year type development, Kerrville doesn't see those types of things, that there'll be some kind of comprehensive approach to how parks and green space are in that subdivision. The developer is obviously aware of city rules and regulations and park dedication. You sit on city council. So that, I think, will be a good model for a new park dedication ordinance, but it would be good if this could be, I don't think this can be done that quickly, but if it could, then I think it would be a good template for future development.
Malcolm, is that park been dedicated to the city?
Yes.
The
Well, there's two things that can happen.
Okay.
There's two things that can happen. The city can allow for them to dedicate and build a park with the idea that it's going to be transferred to the city upon completion. That's one option, and the city would be involved in every step of the way. The other option that cities use is, if I want to build a private park, what kind of credit can I get? And most cities give a 50% credit for those. The reason is that the immediate subdivision, let's say it's a gated community. Gated community, everything inside that gated community is private. Private streets, private sewers, private parks. If somebody was to do a gated community in Kerrville, then while our ordinance doesn't allow it now, in the future we may want to say, hey, we'll give you 50% credit for a private park because it serves the residents of that subdivision, which is what park dedication is primarily geared to do. However, it doesn't allow for the public who doesn't live there to use that park, which is also a minor component. And so most cities have come up with some kind of percentage credit.
So they would pay a fee plus do their park, but that's all negotiated?
Yes, sir.
with planning and zoning?
Yes, sir.
What
Now,
about-
our ordinance right now doesn't allow for private, so, but that, no, but that's one of the things we'll be looking at.
In the Spur, this case we're talking about, this council talked about Tuesday night, that can't happen there?
Well, no, it can, but it would be a public park to
And
meet
the only way-
park
The only way
dedication.
they can do it is make it a public park.
That's right. Or they can do it on their own and no particular involvement by the city is the other choice.
But there is a requirement that they do something or pay a fee.
That's correct.
The other question, one of your slides talked about the park master plan.
Uh-huh.
And then I guess I thought you were gonna tell us about how that's gonna be developed.
I can.
Or is that not part of
I
this?
can.
Are we not going forward with the two things at once?
Well, not at once, because we don't have to.
Okay,
Park dedication is kind of a standalone.
okay.
But with the comprehensive plan, I don't know if Ashley, you've talked to them much about the park master plan, but the comp plan, when the decision was to do that a few years ago, that kind of put everything on ice, because the city really needed to go through that very involved process. Once that was done, now the door is open, and it's paved now for the park master plan to get updated, for park dedication to occur. They don't have to go together, because the park master plan is just going to say, not too different than the comp plan is, hey, we need to fix it. You know,
Okay, that's all.
and that might, the park master plan is something we've talked about updating within the next couple of years. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Do we currently have any money in the special account?
Yeah, what is it, 147?
So so over the years, this is my 4th year on the board, I've never.
The dog
been
park.
Exposed to this.
The dog park at Louise Hayes Park was
That
built
came out of
with-
that fund?
Was built with park dedication funds.
Okay.
Because it was seen as a community-wide park benefit.
What does close proximity mean?
It's, I don't know of any court case which is defined exactly what that is. Most cities use about a half a mile is, maybe a mile is something that you want to try to stay within. So when the city breaks out its east and west areas, that's the big separator, because that's how the money gets accounted for. It's either east money or west money.
Mm-hmm.
But the way you spend that money needs to take into consideration to some degree where that money came from.
So for instance, getting back to the 40 acres again, if he chose to do payment in lieu of, are there any parks within a mile or two of that on Thompson Drive?
Yeah, you've got
The river trail.
across the river, you got
Across the river?
Guadalupe Park.
Okay.
Louise Hayes Park isn't very far away. Yeah, you've got parkland there. Kerrville's
Okay, so
got a
we-
good distribution of fairly large and small parks.
The city wouldn't be required to put a park
No, sir.
closer than that.
Wouldn't be required to go out and try to find land to buy
Yeah, okay.
parkland. That would be actually the kind of the worst case scenario, is
Yeah.
when the city is taking its money that's already deflated. I mean, $200 a unit, you're not buying a whole lot with that in
Right.
today's real estate prices. So, give you an example, San Diego, California, it's $3,500 a unit. So, it's California and it's a big city. But when you're collecting 100 and some odd to $200 a unit, you're already behind. And you don't want to be using that money then to have to go out and find real estate, because now you're going to be even further behind. So you get yourself behind an 8-ball pretty fast if you're trying to use that land to buy land. So your best bet is to either get land from the developer as part of the plat that can be developed, do something in conjunction with their development, or use the fee in lieu of to fix an existing park.
I don't know if this is getting off track, but has there been conversation with that group about continuing the river trail on that
Yes.
side?
And that's one of our items today.
Okay. And I have one other question. Something like, we've been looking at a playscape at the soccer fields. Would those monies that are in that account be
Could they be used for that?
useful
Yes.
for that?
Yes. They could. Any more on that? Well, this is not the first time. We'll be going through this, peeling the onion a little bit each time.
That's a lot of
So,
information.
again, it's not a whiz bang whoopee type thing. It can get a little boring, but it's something we need to do.
One more question. You mentioned maybe a maximum of 10 years. The city must use that money within a 10-year period. How close to that are we? Do we have any funds that need to be spent?
No. No.
No.
No. Well, I think we drained it
Okay.
not 5-6 years ago.
Could those funds also be considered for river trail expansion?
Yes.
then?
Yeah.
So there's several options.
You could. It's not going to do much for you though.
Yeah.
River Trail's very expensive.
Yeah, and that's not very much
And
money.
we'll talk about that in a minute. But you want to be using your park dedication money wisely if you have just a little bit of it. You want to use it for things that can make a difference in a park. Playground's a good example. That's a big impact to a park. When you start trying to build river trails that are, $150 a foot, you don't get very far. So.
Okay. Thank you. Mhm.
We've identified a couple of projects that we'll be looking to utilize the funds. Right now, they're designated for the east side. So we know we have some major water infrastructure repairs that we need to do at Kerrville Shriner Park. So we're going to look at utilizing some of the funds for that. In addition, and I think Malcolm's going to talk to y'all in a minute about this, about reworking some of the trailhead on the G Street part of the river trail. We have some washing out areas that we need to address. I'd also like to introduce our new Chief Planning Officer, Miss Rebecca Cassini. Sorry if I butchered your last name. She's been on board with us about 3 weeks now.
This is my third week.
Yeah, so she'll be working with us on this ordinance as well. So I'm just going to introduce her.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear. What's her official title?
The Chief Planning Officer? Chief Planning Officer.
There's no action needed. It's just.
You want to continue with the number 2?
You bet.
Number 3, project update?
You bet. Occasionally we will give you an update on some capital projects, and today we want to talk a little bit about the HEB Tennis Center, kind of where we are with that, and then River Trail West, kind of segue into that from the last conversation. Both of these projects are being funded by the 4B sales tax, so there is some similarity there. Let me start with HEB. The Economic Improvement Corporation and the City Council set aside $1.5 million for the renovation of the center, and I'll go through a little history there. The design is being done by a firm from Arlington, Texas, Schrickle Rollins and Associates, who have a lot of tennis center experience. We knew going in that the major issues were drainage, the court conditions, the conditions of the building, pro shop. We have relatively little ADA access, and then whether or not there's some ways we can tie the complex together, and I'll show you some of the, if you've been out there, you know that it's very dysfunctional because it's so spread out. The center was built in the 70s. There have been additions since then, including the lower 4 courts over behind Peterson Middle School. The improvements that we made in 2015 and 16 to some court resurfacing kind of led to a bigger picture issue. Wow, that worked. Can we do more? And the issue then became whether or not the EIC or council was interested in doing some additional funding. So in 2017, they set aside that $1.5 million for master planning and for a first phase construction. The design firm has experience, and I just listed a few here. They've designed the A&M Tennis Center. They've done municipal and university work throughout the Southwest. I just highlighted a few here, but they were interested in doing this project. One is they had a project kind of in the region, and number 2, Don Davis was the interim city manager at the time, and he knew they wanted to do something in Kerrville, and so they actually kind of came to us and turned out that that was a good thing just because of their experience.
Malcolm, I went to the meetings, they had the tennis courts,
Uh-huh.
installed the plants and all that, and it all, it's wonderful. But since all of that, and maybe you guys were already on top of this and knew it was gonna happen, the Kerrville Independent School District is now talking about a bond issue to leave that
Right.
junior high area.
Right,
And, because that's such valuable property
Right.
and it's on the busy street.
Right.
For lots of reasons.
right.
Is that going to alter at all what that plan was?
No, it won't alter the plan directly to the tennis court and tennis play issue. It could affect drainage.
That's what I was thinking about.
And we've had a discussion internally about what are some things that might could happen with development of the school site to deal with drainage. That drainage comes off of Highway 16
Oh, they built those buildings along
and
there.
it runs straight onto the golf course. That's the magnet. And so what we don't want to do is have that drainage not managed as it gets to or across that golf course. So we've had some discussions about detention and some other things. And I can kind of show you some areas on the master plan we've talked about. But the bad thing and the good thing about the school site now, it's almost all impervious material. It's almost either all roofing or parking. So it's not probably gonna do any, it's not getting worse with drainage just because of the condition of the site now. So, but that's a good point. There will need to be some addressing of access, overflow parking to the tennis center, which now is being provided by Peterson Middle School. There needs to be consideration for drainage and road improvements and all those things. So, yeah, it'll be, while not directly affecting the master plan, it will affect the relationship between the center and that school property. The first thing we wanted Schrickle Rollins to do, and what Linda was describing, was an input process that took place back a year ago to evaluate the usage in the facilities and the programs. And what did the tennis public really want to do? They also interviewed city council members and staff to begin gathering up a to-do list. What are the biggest priorities? As we went through the preliminary plan, they also developed a cost estimate associated with those. And we got to well beyond our $1.5 million in about 3 minutes. So as they massaged this plan, the key was, how do you make it a master plan with a cost estimate versus a phase one construction? What's most important to build now? So as we did that and had follow-up stakeholder meetings, the priorities for phase one started to surface. The master plan elements primarily address drainage, which is a big issue. The facilities, obviously, access, the conditions of the courts, the need that everybody saw for Kerrville to make the next step in tennis was possibly to cover a couple of courts to create kind of a center court, covered court facility. Lighting, electrical systems throughout the complex. Parking obviously would change dramatically if the school district changes their property. And that estimate came in at around $4 million. Well, you can tell that's a little different than what we've got money for. Oh, let the cat out of the bag there. Let me walk through real quickly, and I'm going to try to use this. Hang on. There we go. The courts shown in the master plan are primarily the same courts we have today. There really was very little done to reorient or change those, except for these two courts here and the addition of these two courts here. These two courts are being moved in phase one, maybe 15 feet. And the reason they're doing that is to create this aisle, this alley through here, to be able to get to these lower courts better. Right now, these courts are affixed to these courts. And so if you go from the pro shop to those lower courts, you got to go this way. And what that does is that means people park here and never show up to the pro shop. They never pay their fee. They just show up. So for there to be continuity in the complex and for there to be some management of the play in the complex, we need to route everybody through the pro shop, which is right here. So once you come into this location, you'll be able to walk through this alley to these courts, and we'll make all that ADA compliant. So that's a big issue. That's the biggest issue for that $4 million is covering these courts and making them an all-weather facility for not just play, but to attract tournaments. The other big issue is this corridor right here, the central core of the complex, right now handles all the pedestrians, it handles all the observation area, and it handles a large percentage of the drainage that comes from these apartments up here, comes through the parking lot, and then just kind of deposits into this entire complex. Well, you know, think about any facility. You don't want to mix pedestrians and drainage. That's probably not the best thing. So we've got to improve this drainage and observation area in here, and that's also a big percentage of the improvements. The other thing I wanted to mention to you, and this property here is the Peterson Middle School. The city right now has parking in this location for the tennis center, and it cannot handle tournaments. It handles day-to-day play, but it's too small for tournaments. The city has an agreement with the school district that allows for there to be use of this parking behind the middle school for tournaments, primarily because it doesn't conflict with school hours. You know, tennis tournaments and school hours are not the same time. And that can allow for there to be better parking capability for tournaments, but it also allows for there to be access to these courts if you need be. The other thing is Peterson Middle School uses these courts for their play. That's also part of the agreement. So whenever the school district wants to have tennis activity, which generally is year-round, they use these courts right here. So that's a good combination in marriage, which could be affected by any change to that real estate. But that's the master plan overview. Here's the kind of the aerial perspective of that. These are the two courts that would be slightly relocated to create this aisle and then covered. The local tennis association is going to use this graphic to try to go out and raise money for that that covered pavilion, and we'll see how that goes. These are the two courts that are being looked at to be added in the future phase, but this corridor right here going to these lower courts is a key element to this improvement project. And I mentioned earlier, this entire center area is going to be reworked for better pedestrian access, meeting ADA requirements, improving drainage, and really improving the observation area for tennis spectators and for gathering for tennis players. There are two wooden decks out there now, one built by the Police Athletic League probably 25 years ago, and the other was built as a Boy Scout Eagle project, and both of those are in pretty dire need of not just repair, but they don't meet any ADA requirements. Here's a blow up of that central core area. There's going to be a substantial redo of this area right here, primarily to handle those things I mentioned, drainage and observation. But it's also going to be enhanced with landscaping to make the appearance of the complex look a lot better. And then also you can see a little bit better from the pro shop this alley that'll get you to those lower courts. In the future, these courts, this pavilion, and a few other things can be added, but they're not They're not in this phase. One other area of concern, and it goes back to what was talked about with the school district property. We get a lot of drainage coming through this area off of the Peterson property and then also coming down Tennis Street. That water runs straight into a intermittent little detention area on the golf course on hole number 10. And there are some issues with that pond and with that drainage that may get enhanced with redevelopment of the school or just some work done at the golf course. So that's a kind of a sidebar improvement that would be looked at associated with this master plan. Let's talk about phase one. That's the one where we're going to start and get work done now. Construction is going to run at about $1.35 million, and the difference between that and $1.5 million is Trickle Rollins obviously has a fee for master plan and doing construction documents and inspection, but we also have some contingency that we want to withhold for construction in case we run into some cost problems. Drainage, as I mentioned, court resurfacing, all the courts are going to get some attention, provided seating upgrades. One key component is we, as with any other business, private property, or public, the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation has to approve all plans of $50,000 or more to make sure they meet what we term ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act compliance. There is nothing about this facility that meets ADA, not a single thing. So we have to redo much of that. You're not held responsible for any site that doesn't meet ADA as long as you don't make those improvements. But as soon as you do, you need to make sure it's in conformance 100%. So we have to treat all of this site with a very close eye on TDLR and ADA improvements. We're going to create that pathway that I showed between those two banks of courts to get to those lower courts. That is going to play a big part in how those courts can be improved and used more, because right now you have to walk really across a muddy path to get there.
Malcolm, the prior repairs that were done on the courts, wasn't some of that resurfacing, or was that just around?
I'm going to show you that was resurfacing, and we can live with most of that, but that kind of was the impetus to get this money, was, wow, look what we were able to do with $50,000. Look what we can do with $1.5 million. So I think the situation with those resurfaced courts are going to be, they were used kind of as the catalyst for this. The upgrades will consist of fencing to courts 4 through 10. We've got court 4 is separate from a battery of courts, but there's some problems on court 4. We need to make improvements to the pro shop. The parking and access improvements need to be made. The practice court is going to get resurfaced, but we're also going to have a substantial amount of improved signage. We're going to screen the dumpster. We'll have some site furniture. There'll be some general amenities that will be added to the facility to make it more attractive. I'd mentioned court 4. That photo on the left is some fencing and sub-base work that we need to do to that bank of courts, but that's really all that needs to be done to courts 1 through 4. But you can see that erosion has started to cause some real problems, and that triggers fence repair. The upper right photo were the courts that were before we made those improvements a couple of years ago, and the lower courts are the improvements today. So you can see the difference that it makes, not just in appearance, but playability. You can't really see the alligator surface that exists on that upper right slide, but it becomes not just a play issue, it becomes a trip hazard for players. We have to improve, hang on. We have to improve accessibility throughout. We have had over the years, you know, sidewalks added and all that, but like I said, we don't meet ADA, so that's an important part of this. Drainage, there's the drainage system that runs around the between the lower courts and the center courts. That's needs to be enhanced, and then the pro shop itself is going to be upgraded both internally and externally to make it more functional. Our next steps, we will be getting 100% plan documents for review this next Monday. So we're in the last phase of plan review. We expect to have this thing hopefully under construction by the end of this calendar year. Get bids in and then get construction started. There will be some construction sequencing that we have to work through with these plan documents to allow for some limited use of the complex. One of the things that tennis struggles with is once you get on rotation for tournaments, you don't want to lose that rotation. If you get a junior tournament, USTA tournament, and you miss a year, you may not get it back. So you want to try to keep as many of your tournaments as you can. To do that, we need to keep some level of these courts open. There can be adjunct courts used, like at Shriner or at Tavy. Those are okay, but you've got to make sure that you keep your core facility still operable. So we're going to keep many of these courts available, and the way we're going to do that is courts 1 through 4 and courts 10 through 14 or 11 through 14. We're going to go ahead. Ashley's already moved forward to get those resurfaced now. Same construction company that did the resurfacing a couple of years ago is just going to go ahead and resurface those. There's not really anything else to those courts that needs to be done. Get those knocked out and then set up a kind of a temporary pro shop somehow during construction so that we can continue with those 8 courts to stay functional all during construction. And in that way, only that center core area is being affected. Like I said, we really want to try to get everything in place for construction start by the end of this calendar year so we can finish up in mid-2019. There's no way a tennis complex can be built, repaired, or shut down where you don't affect tennis play. That's just real. I mean, maybe January, February, but that's about it. So we're going to affect the use of the complex to some degree. Any questions on the tennis center? Yes, sir.
2 questions. I don't guess I really understand our long-range parking plan, number 1. And assuming the bond issue passes and the KISD sells all of that land to a developer who's going to build whatever.
Target.
And we lose that parking, what are we going to do long range?
Well, I think it would have to be a dialogue with the development plan. You know, there's going to be obviously a multitude of issues that the city and the developer have to coordinate and get worked out. You know, drainage being one, but there could be, as part of that conversation, a way to utilize parking within that development. That's an option. There could be some additional parking added right, if I can get this, there we go. There's some area here that's not developed, that's pretty flat, that we've looked at that could add some parking spaces. You know, this
But
being
the only land the city owns is really the green area on that.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
That is correct. But the you know, development of Peterson property, if it was to take advantage of Highway 16, it's probably going to have some retail involved in it. And if you're on a weekend user of the tennis center for a tournament or whatever, then being able to park next to retail is good and bad for a developer. You know, it's good for the shop, not necessarily good for taking up their parking spaces, if you can get some activity. So there may be some give and take on that, but it will definitely be part of the conversation with any development of that property. It has to be.
Second question is, do we have a thought as to how we're gonna finance the next phase?
No, that hasn't come up, other than the tennis association trying to raise money for the covered courts.
Okay.
But additional phases right now are not a pressing issue. Adding 2 courts is not a pressing issue. The covered courts don't really change the existing use.
We haven't had any discussion with the EIC or the
No, sir.
council about, okay, that was not a question, thank you.
All right, let's see, let's go. Any more on that one? Okay. River Trail West is shown in red on that far left-hand side. That little sliver is River Trail West. And the yellow is the remainder of the existing trail. So you can see that little half mile is volume-wise, you know, it's not adding a tremendous amount of trail extension, but it's doing a few things that are monumental. Number one, we've got 20 real estate transactions to get that half a mile. And that, believe me, has been a story to tell. The other piece of this is it creates a really good trailhead at the Dietert Center, which is important. If you're going to terminate a trail for any period of time, you always want to have a good trailhead. Lowry Park, while it gets good access to that subdivision, isn't a real trail. It's kind of a small trailhead. It's an access point. So the Dietert Center creates some business for them, and it creates some business for the city that kind of blend in with what the river trail was supposed to do in the first place. So I just want to give you a reference there how small this section is, but it's been a real honey. The photo here was taken right before we started construction. Up on the hill to the right is the Lowry Trailhead. You can't really see much there, but that's the Lowry Trailhead, and this is the location for the trail, and then this is what it looks like today at that same location. That trail section is complete. We've got about, I'm going to say the trail itself is about 95% done, but we haven't done the trailhead construction yet, and I'll kind of run through these slides. This is going to be a kind of before and after slideshow here. We have had, as with the rest of the river trail, very difficult scheming ways to get concrete down to the trail. The trail requires a tremendous amount of concrete, and it's about 5 times the volume of a sidewalk. So if you took a cross section, if you did 1 foot of sidewalk, linear feet of a sidewalk, and then you did at 10 feet wide, and then you did 1 foot of the river trail, there's 5 times the amount of concrete and steel in that than there is a normal sidewalk. So it's a big construction project in regard to concrete work. But getting those trucks down there has been everything from, you can't really see too well, but right here, the chute from the truck is dropping into a pressurized hopper. This pressurized hopper is pumping concrete through this tube back that way. And they brought in aerial trucks in some areas. So, you know, bringing concrete in here isn't like pouring a driveway. It's been a lot more involved than that. And that's just the nature of building in this environment. And that's happened with all the rest of the trail. There's that section today. The goal, obviously, is over time that will get vegetated, and then it'll look like the rest of the trail. But the idea, too, is to make sure that we don't have substantial drop-offs between the trail itself and the adjacent land. You want that grade to be just a slight drop for drainage, but you don't want people going off a bicycle or spraining an ankle because they stepped off the trail. This kind of shows the steel that is involved. Each one of the trail sections has a toe down. A toe down is basically a perimeter beam. You can see a little bit there. This drops down 30 inches. So what keeps the trail in place during high water flood conditions is its weight and those real deep toe downs. Those toe downs in this steel and the thickness of the concrete is also made because we want to be able to carry an ambulance if we need to. So it's got dual purpose there. And that's that section today. This contractor's done a really good job. They haven't been the fastest. This is their first trail project, but they started off a little rough, but after a couple of weeks, actually after we had them tear out a section and redo it, they figured it out pretty fast. We're now at the west end of the property. This is the Palacios condominiums. The city actually, about 2 years ago, we finalized acquisition of this hard to see trail. They've got a 10-foot trail that was built behind the Palacios. And the reason they built that is at the time they built it, they knew there was going to be eventually a river trail. They hoped there would be, and they wanted to get it done then. That Palacios Condos has changed ownership a couple of times since then. But anyway, the city was able to get this trail, so we're going to tie the river trail to that trail, and that'll get us another 600-700 feet of Palacios frontage. And then that will be the end of the trail. But one of the real bugaboos with this section trail is this steep limestone block retaining wall. We've got to work with some pretty intense development behind that. So as you look at this slide, you kind of get an idea of what we're having to do. We're having to go in and do some matching to this existing retaining wall because we've got the same slope problems that they did. So this one course wall will eventually be 3 courses of stone. So it'll be sitting up a lot higher. This was taken right before the rain. These blocks don't look like that now. They weren't able to get this pour done. These blocks collapsed into this trench. So they have to go in now and redo all of this, and that's putting us a little bit behind. But that's the nature of outside construction. That's how it works. We always want to build in enough time in construction to allow for bad weather. The good thing is this is the first bad weather we've had since they started. So we'll take the rain versus them having to replace a few blocks. This is one of the drainage structures that is going in right behind the Dietert Center. It's going to be at the Dietert Trailhead. This is the base area for that, what's called an elevated walkway. There's a 8-inch, 9-inch gap between this surface and then the trail that sits on top of it. But it kind of gives you an idea of some of the drainage complexities that have to go in to this thing. This is the top section now being added that's at the trail level, and that's sitting on top of that other structure so that water from their parking lot, which is over here. Man, Martin, I'm having trouble. Their parking lot is here and it drains down. It goes under this and out to the river. That way we don't have surface water of that volume always on the trail. That becomes a problem. We can live with the intermittent water on the trail. What we can't live with is regular, constant water on the trail or debris. Debris is a killer. Okay, so anybody have any questions on the trail? We're right now anticipating completion the end of October. That depends on weather lows and hurricanes and all that type of thing, but we think that the end of October is a reasonable time. There's another phase of this that always occurs with all projects, and that is the Parks Department moves in after the contractor leaves and they do clean up, finish up, things that the contractor wasn't required to do, landscaping, putting in some signage, establishment of trash receptacles and benches. Some of those things the staff does and will do over a period of time. Is there any questions on? Yes, sir.
Are you able to keep, I've seen people
No.
on it, you're not able to keep people off? You put up fences real well and they still just don't pay attention to it.
We have at Lowry just an orange
Yeah.
plastic fence with some orange barrels, and they try to keep those hooked up so that it's pretty obvious. Pretty much every day, somebody has loosened that orange barrel, and
Oh, you can just step right over it.
they, yeah, they really don't have to go over it. They just walk across it straight. And it's, oh, look at there, the fence is down. So, yeah, we're getting, and that's been the case with all sections. What we have to be careful of with things like trespassing or allowing use of the trail at this point is it's owned by the contractor. It's his insurance. It's his liability. It ain't the city's. And so it's up to him to make sure he does everything he can to make it secure. Now, if somebody gets hurt and they decide to sue somebody, they'll walk through that contractor in a heartbeat, and then they'll come after the city. So, you know, the city does have a vested interest in making sure they are doing what they need to do in regard to safety, but their insurance will be hit first. So,
You know, it looks so beautiful and inviting. I've been tempted to go down there myself, but I haven't. But I mean, that looks like it's gonna be a very lovely segment.
it's an interesting little half mile. It's a little, yeah, interesting. Okay, this next one, last slide, is to begin some discussion about future extensions. We have the River Trail West will literally use the last dollar of the $6 million allocation for the river trail that was set up in 2011. So with River Trail West, we're done as far as funding. If there was to be any future funding, these projects that I'm going to show you have been the ones that have been most talked about as kind of a future phase, master plan type discussion. I know this is a little hard to see, but I'm going to try to walk through this with this little pointer. The existing river trail is shown in yellow. The existing trailheads are shown with the star. So those are the places where you can access the trail, mostly with parking. The third piece of this is the section shown in red. Those are the areas that we can talk about real quickly today. Let me run through those real fast. G Street, which has a new bridge, you know, it's a road bridge that's fairly new, abandoned the old bridge. Well, that's a perfect bridge for pedestrian and for the river trail. So what we've looked at is the possibility of using that extension of the trail to cross to the north bank of the river, come down the north bank of the river, tie into Schreiner University, and then go back up into the neighborhoods that exist around Schreiner University. And Schreiner is extremely excited about this, and they've already started some dialogue with the EIC about this. So that's about a mile. Don't hold me to that, but that's about a mile project. I'm not going to do these in order. I'm going to do these geographic order here. This one that's labeled number 6 would be able to take that trail and extend it all the way down to Louise Hayes Park. This is the Louise Hayes Park trailhead. That would give you a full loop around the river. So that's another option that's been looked at.
I thought that was River Hill down there.
Yeah,
That is.
River Hill is this little section
Right.
extension right there.
That's where you point.
Highway 16, highway,
When you
that's
say
the,
Louis,
Not
I
the
thought.
Mount-
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry,
Yeah, that's the loop.
I'm sorry.
There you go.
Louise Hayes Park.
Yeah.
So
That's Shriner
that
Park.
North Bank Trail would come on around and
Yes.
tie in here. And Shriner is right, this is Shriner University right here.
At
No.
534, how do you cross the river? Is that abandoned road there?
Yes.
Below the bridge?
Yeah, the Legion Bridge
Yeah.
is there. And we go under 534 Bridge on the south bank. We would do the same thing on the north bank. If you go up, working yourself west, there has been discussion back when the sports complex, which is right here, connecting the sports complex to the river trail using Town Creek. It has some challenges, but that's a discussion to extend that trail that way, which would not only get you to the sports complex, but to several neighborhoods, which is a key. If you work your way west, right here is the Dietert Center, this location here, the Palacios Dietert Center. Work to Guadalupe Park and possibly out to the Old Family Sports Center property was originally the first phase the city was going to build back in 2009 and 10. And we decided that didn't make any sense. Let's connect Tranquility Island to the Riverside Nature Center. That made a lot more sense. So that section 3 would be to run primarily from the Dietert Center to the Family Sports Center. The next section would be to take that same idea of a loop system and go ahead and extend that out to Loop 98, Spur 98, come around it, and come back on the south bank then and get to that McDonald development that we were talking about just west of the state hospital. And then that section, which includes conversation with them about including the river trail, bring that on across the state hospital property and either along the river to Louise Hayes Park or actually bring it on down and maybe using something like the Lima Street Bridge, which has a very wide passage there. Can some of that be sectioned off to have a trail along it, which is a pretty common bridge use? It would take TxDOT coordinate. That's a TxDOT bridge. I had conversation with the state hospital about, 5 years ago or so about using or getting some kind of easement across their property, and it seemed doable, but you were going to do it in Austin. You weren't going to do it local. So you have to deal with their real estate and attorney folks in Austin to do that. So anyway, that's the status of the kind of the master plan future phases, and we'll kind of see where that goes.
That looks beautiful.
I don't know,
Wish
Ashley,
we
if
had
you
the
wanted
money
to
to
add
Fantastic.
do it right now.
anything to that or
But it'd be,
any of these, so.
if
there
this
you go.
is 6 million.
Thank you.
imagine what all
Next
that
time I
is.
see you, the River
Yeah.
Trail West will be done, and Tennis Center will be hopefully under construction.
Were you gonna tell us about the work you're gonna do at the G Street to fix that?
I can. We we have one area on the trail that has been a problem since day one, and it's the result of some off-site drainage coming down from Highway 173, and it's a big undeveloped piece of property known as G12, and it has a open drainage ditch along the west side of it, and then it daylights down at the trail. At the time we were building that section of trail, the engineer solution was, hey, I think we can do this by doing some surface improvements. They did some gabions in the actual ditch. There was a drainage pad built with some baffles on it to try to slow some water down. The problem is all that does is it slows the mud down. It doesn't really change it or hold it. So because it's all undeveloped up there, every time we get a good rain, that water's coming across the trail with a lot of mud and rock and debris, and it just causes two problems. One, it's a maintenance nightmare for park staff to have to go out there and clean it. But number two, it's a liability because of the mud and everything that's on that trail. And that section of trail gets a lot of fast bikers. We're looking at building, just like behind the Diedert Center where I showed you that pad, and then we've got the trail on top, elevated walkway. We're looking to do something similar to that at that location. We had talked about doing it initially, and we backed off, and that's one of those, hindsight's 20/20 things. But really the only way to fix that is get that water under the trail, not let it go across the top.
Well, one other question when I'm thinking about it, if somebody's putting in a switchback
That's
connection
the
to
peak, peak fitness.
is that Peak Fitness
Yes.
is doing that?
Now,
Are we creating a same washing, because there's a big ditch that they put alongside that with rock in it, is that gonna create the same issue?
we're gonna need to, one of the goals of the river trail was to encourage private access to the trail. That was a big key to this. So what they're doing is fine. If anything they do within the city's 30-foot easement, which is 30 feet in that area, has to meet TDLR and ADA requirements. They on their own have to meet TDLR requirements for the rest of their project. So that one's on them. In regard to drainage, we're going to have to look and see, have we created a nuisance here that needs to be looked at. It shouldn't be something that can't be fixed with vegetation over time because it existed before. But we may need to get with them and say, hey, let's take a look at this. You guys have influenced use on the trail.
Thank you.
Thank you, Malcolm. Ashley?
All right, just want to gauge and see how everybody's doing on time. Have about another 20 minutes or so left for presentation. Is everybody good, or would you like to defer? Or I
No,
can
let's
send
go
it?
ahead with it.
Okay, great.
People have to leave, that'd be okay.
Perfect. Martin, if we can get that presentation pulled up. Perfect. Okay, so quick update on the budget. Council adopted at their second reading the FY19 budget this week, and particularly the enhancements to our department. That includes the addition of 2 sports complex staff, maintenance workers, the addition of 1 park ranger. We're adding a tourism and recreation coordinator.
Oh, nice.
And this position is essentially going to be very tourism oriented. It's going to work closely with the Convention and Visitors Bureau, help showcase and market the sports complex, the tennis center, aquatic facility if we get it, golf course, and Kerrville Shriner Park as well, in addition to special events that will drive some heads and beds tourism for the city. With the retirement of one of our Kerrville Shriner Park staff, Chuck Storms, we took the opportunity to do a little bit of reorganization of the Kerrville Shriner Park field staff. So what we did there is we took his position, kind of divided it into 2, got 2 park rangers out of it, and we're moving the field staff under the park superintendent, which is Justin. So they'll basically report to him. We get more boots on the ground, which is what we needed to take care of the operations at Kerrville Shriner Park with the increased capacity that we're getting over there as well. With our new rec and tourism coordinator, we've kind of split our recreation budget into 2, and we now have a community events division in budget. And we also looked at our fees for Kerrville Shriner. We haven't increased fees in years, and we did a market analysis and went ahead and realized, hey, we're kind of under market, and brought our fees back up to where it kind of covers some of our operational costs as well, and then kind of leaves us pretty fair with the state parks as well. So that's our budget in a nutshell. Activities update, the sports complex. A quick note on the user groups for this facility on the soccer side. We have several in addition to what we kind of originally planned for. We have Our Lady of the Hills High School that uses the facility for their soccer games, their home games for the boys and girls teams. We have the Notre Dame Catholic School, which just started utilizing the soccer complex as well. We have Hill Country Crash Academy. We have Hill Country Youth Soccer Association, and they also will be hosting a regional soccer clinic in October at the facility as well. That draws about 200 folks or kids from the region to attend this clinic at the sports complex. And then also our sports leagues were playing there as well.
Ashley?
Yes.
Do any of these contribute to the fund for maintenance of that park? I mean, or is there a contribution to the general fund or a contribution to?
Yep, so there's fees
Sports
associated
complexes.
with use of the complex per their agreement, so those do go into the general fund. Just another reminder of the way the fields are laid out. You'll hear kind of questions about, well, why isn't this facility hosting a lot of soccer tournaments? Well, that's because the lay of the land, as you recall, the soccer side is very much for local youth programming. The lay of the land in itself, we don't have enough of the larger 11v11 fields, the 9x9 fields that are going to attract the larger tournaments. But what we do and can attract is the very small tournaments, which most aren't looking for that for the small and the younger kids. So we're filling a local gap here as far as the leagues, but the baseball side of the venue is the tournament and league facility. So if you get those questions, just kind of a reminder back, as the soccer side was not designed to be a tournament-based facility. It's more designed to fill the local needs of the community. DBAT tournaments to date, so far they have held a little bit over 350 tournaments this year. Pursuant to their contract, they have a 2-year kind of a freebie window, and after that 2-year window,
Not 350 tournaments.
teams,
Okay.
tournament teams to date.
Okay.
And based on their agreement with us, after that 2-year window, their rent to us is based on a sliding scale of number of teams and tournaments that they bring. 400 is about their 400 teams is their threshold to where they would pay 0 rent. So if they're pretty on track to bringing in their number of teams that they were supposed to be doing, so they're doing good. Quick update on your projects, our projects that you approved at your last meeting. We took those to council on the 28th, and council went ahead and approved all of the items, and in addition to supporting the items, the remainder of the items pursuant to funding, the one thing that they did do was strike number 16 on the list, which was your playability of the fields. They went ahead and removed that, but did approve everything else and approved pursuant to funding the support future projects that we have identified as well. And you do have that listed in front of you too. Staff's already working on these projects. We have the soccer lights done. We're working on quotes for everything else. Anything over 5,000 we have to have quotes for. We'll be pouring the concrete soon for the additional sidewalks, and we're moving forward with that. The reuse pond is done. We switched over to reuse effluent water a couple of months ago, if you recall. The fence around it is done, and so we are moving right along over there at the sports complex. Aquatics, recap of the summer. If you recall, we did some minor improvements over there with painting, updating signage. Open swim, we're open every day over there except for Mondays. We're closed for maintenance. And here's kind of a snapshot of the operating days there this year as well. We made some adjustments. We opened a little bit earlier than we normally do. The last week of between Memorial Day and June, school was still in session, but we did do some half days so kids could come swim in the afternoons. And then we also stayed open until the middle of August. So we're open for a total of 73 days this summer, which is an increase over last year. Here's a look at the attendance versus last year. This year we had a total of 13,867. Last year we had a little bit less at 13,624. But if you notice, there's a big difference between July last year and this year. We had 6278 in 2017 and 4587 of this year. So even though we stayed open later in August, we still kind of saw some change in numbers.
Do you have any idea why? July?
No, not really. It wasn't really a wet summer for us, so we didn't have, we weren't closed. It's just, we're kind of scratching our heads there as well.
Maybe it was too hot.
Maybe it's too hot, with the heat, people want to stay indoors. It just depends on what people have going on, vacations and everything else, the economics. Swim lessons, we have the group swim lessons privates and semi-privates, which was new this year. Our swim lessons program did very well. Staff was tasked with increasing participation, and they did a great job. Total for the groups, we increased 32% from 2017 on enrollment, which is fantastic. And then private swim lessons, we went up 93%, which is a very amazing job of our aquatic staff. So Semi-private lessons is basically two kids and one instructor. We had 7 of those, and again, that was a new program that's continuing to build as well. So our swim lessons program was very successful this summer. We also offered the water aerobics and the lap swim as usual, and again, the Diedrich Center does the water aerobics 3 days a week, and they love it. They want more time in the pool. They want us year-round, which we're working on. We held the junior lifeguard camp this summer as well for the first time. It was full, I believe, just about full. Very successful. Heard great things from the participants and the parents, so this is something that we will continue for next year as well. Our lifeguards did outstanding during their operational audits through our organization that we are licensed under. We receive, if you recall, 2 audits per year that are unannounced. They videotape the guards on stand, and they come in, they announce themselves, and then they put them through a variety of drills and skills, and they received the highest score you can get on both audits this summer, so they did a fantastic job. We offered some new promotional days at the pool this summer as well, and we'll continue to do that next year. Rentals, we had pool rentals and private rentals that we offer during the summer. We're looking at ways to kind of capitalize on these more to get kind of more, a little bit more attendance during these. Our pool rentals, we had running about 56% occupancy for the actual pool rentals, and then the large pavilion rentals are running about 20%. So just still an increase over the previous years, but still an opportunity to make some revenue there. We participated, as you know, in the competitive lifeguard competitions this summer. We took 2 teams. The Angels, which is kind of the team 1, were the state champions, and the Owls, which is team 2, was a state runner-up. So essentially at the 3 competitions they competed in, they came in 1st and 2nd, which is outstanding, especially for the 2nd team as their very first year to compete. So congratulations to them, and they were also featured on KINS 5 News, if you recall.
And just want to put in there that we helped to sponsor one of the teams.
Yes, thank you.
So,
we appreciate that.
our
That
board
helps
did.
pay for the trips and the training and all that good stuff. And they also received recognition at a city council meeting, and they had their own day proclaimed for August 15th as Guard Team Day, and they're all excited. They're wearing their medals.
Very cool.
Yeah. Sports leagues, and I can have Josh jump in here too if we have any additions here, but we had a summer league for soccer which had 10 teams, very successful. We have one coming up in the fall. The summer league was played at the sports complex, and the fall league will actually play at Singing Winds Park on the outfields. Anything to add?
The leagues are starting to draw from we're starting to get teams from Bernie and San Antonio interested in playing Kerrville. So there's a lot of competition going on in Kerrville, particularly in soccer. Teams are a little sad they can't play at the sports complex in the fall, but that just shows how popular it is and the use that we're getting in the fall, and the fact that they want to come to Kerrville and play. So soccer's doing really well.
Speaking of the sports complex, I failed to mention that recently we noticed one of our sister cities vehicles driving around the complex, and staff called and said, "Hey, are you supposed to be giving a tour over here to the city?" And I said, "No." So we kind of approached them and said, "Hey, what are y'all doing over here?" And they're like, "Well, we're checking out your complex because y'all are taking your tournaments from us, and we wanted to come see what your facility is all about." So the complex is working, especially regionally, and our hotel occupancy tax is actually up about $105,000 from last year to date. So, and the sports complex does play a role in that as well, bringing in people to spend the night in hotels. We have a kickball league that's coming up. We held one in the summer, which was successful, and it was so successful that they asked for another one, like now. So we will be offering one in October at the sports complex too. Special events, Get Outdoors Day we held in June. We had a very successful event that most of you guys helped work at, and you know all about the activities that we drew in for this. We had our 5K, we had our craft run, we had a bunch of fun stuff going on. We had a volleyball tournament at the end, we had education, we have a dunking booth, we had all sorts of fun stuff. We incorporated the zoo, the pets this year, as well as the train, which was very successful. There's an action shot of one of our staff in the photo, the volleyball tournament. It was just a great event that we're continuing to add to it. Our skateboard competition was held in June. We had about 6 participants, I believe, so it's a little bit small, smaller than previous years, but it was kind of raining that day, so the weather definitely played a part in it. And T&J is our big sponsor for that event. Our Movies in the Park series we held this year, 5, including one we're going to do in October. Here's kind of a layout of our attendance of each movie. They did really very well. Little Mermaid, Coco had the highest attendance in the movie. So the Disney movies, the kids-friendly movies, are the stuff that really we see the main attraction for. And then we'll be showing Hotel Transylvania in October. We did a Facebook poll, and that was the movie that came back as the winner from the community. So we've got one coming up. Summer Concerts in the Park was a new series that we decided to do this year. We had no budget for it, but we came in and staff hustled sponsorships and had the entire event paid for, which is fantastic. And they were very successful, and we are planning to continue to add to that program next year as well. July 4th fireworks, which you guys know about, we do. The kids triathlon, we had this summer 64 overall participants at Singing Winds Park. It's the last day, basically the pool's open, and we do this in the morning, and then we do the wet and wag in the afternoon. Wet and wag, we had a total of 38 dogs participate. It was a lot of fun, and we have a sponsor, Dogology in Fredericksburg. If y'all are ever up there in that shop, if y'all will thank them, and Polly Rickert particularly, they give us really fantastic gift bags that they give to the dogs, and so we really appreciate their help. It's a fun event. We have our first car show, River Cruisin' Hot Rod Night, that we are planning to do this Saturday, but I think with the weather predictions, we're probably going to have to cancel it, so we will keep you posted, and if we do, we'll come back next spring or next fall and try again.
So you're not going to try to reschedule later in the year?
We looked at that. The calendar for October is already booked for the park, and then with the weather for the end of September, we have the triathlon, and the weather forecast, it looks like it's going to be kind of not undesirable to reschedule. So as you know, we do event support for a variety of events. We have the Kerrville Triathlon, which is coming up at the end of this month, which will utilize the trail and the park in addition to the roads for the bike portion of it as well. They're always looking for volunteers, so if you'd like to volunteer, you can contact them. We have the Chalk Festival that will be held in Peterson Plaza October 13th and 14th. No street closures. A beautiful event in the plaza. If you haven't been, I'd encourage you to go. It's a really neat thing to see. And of course, the farmers market every Friday downtown as well until October. Okay, next big event for us is our Family Fright Night, which is Halloween. We're working on that, planning some great stuff there. As you recall, last year we moved it from Kerrville Shriner to Louise Hayes, and our attendance blew up. We had about 3,000 folks there, so we're planning for that as well. We're incorporating an exotic petting zoo. We're adding bounce houses. We're doing more programming and activities at the event to kind of help grow it. But this and the Daddy-Daughter Dance are definitely our most successful events. A couple of pictures from last year. And then November we'll have our holiday lighted parade as well. We've already started taking entries for it, and we're up to
about 15.
About 15 already, which is great. So we'll be looking to get volunteers from y'all as well to help us with this event. It takes kind of a small army to put this one on. So there's that, and that's it. Sorry for keeping y'all so long today. Do y'all have any questions?
Yeah.
So Bedford and I are the representatives from the board to work with the Family Fright Night. And so we would love to have each of you participate as volunteers. And so if you'll talk to me after the meeting, I'll tell you some of the things that are going to happen there if you would like to volunteer for a particular activity or to do a particular thing. And then also they're looking for some sponsors. And I've given out some of these Family Fright Night sponsor forms. I brought some if you have anybody that you think that you would like to talk to about helping to sponsor for the candy and the toys that are given out. And I've got a couple of these if you would like to take one. And just, you might want to give Josh a call if you have somebody in mind to see if they have already, I don't know if you've already collected.
We haven't really quite yet.
You haven't?
Not for lots of sponsorships, though.
So, yeah, so it would be good to see if we can get, they're looking for about $3,000 to pay for candy and toys to give out. at the event. So if you'd like to get one of those from me, I'll be happy to give you one of those. But we'd love to have everybody there.
Well,
participating
I'm doing
somehow.
an old tunnel booth. We're gonna do bats.
Oh, nice.
You're gonna give away bats?
No, I'm not gonna. Yeah, with every bat, you get the rabies title.
Oh,
So
that's
we're
a
gonna
great,
do
yeah,
it
that's a
with
great tie-in with Halloween. Okay.
Josh, you want to add anything to that?
No, we just appreciate everything you guys do for us, and we'd love to have you at that event. Now that, well, after this weekend, we potentially be done with the car show, river cruising, all hands on deck, and all planning will be, well, our first part of planning for that. So that'll be in our sights. So yeah, we're excited.
Okay, thank you. Anything else?
Move we adjourn.
Second.
Well, we have a couple things here. Let's see, our next meeting will be December the 13th. That's still appropriate, okay? And there's no action on the announcements for the community interest, so I did hear a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
2.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you very much.